As you're speaking, I'm like, oh, where do I start? Because as I was asking questions, you were coming to your next point, which answered my question before. So helpfully, Adrian Beer slid me a note across the table. And
Thank you, Adrian.
And I think it actually fits perfectly with the last sort of comments of your address, which really talked about speed and agility. And as you know, Adrian has put, speed requires trust, but trust building requires patience and continuity. How do we get the balance between the two?
Oh, wow. No, it's a really good... look, everything is always this thing of optimisation, isn't it? And, you know, when you have trust, you can do things really fast because you trust and you know people will have your back. And trust is something, as you say, is built over time and then lost in a moment. And I've got a feeling that there's been moments when we have lost trust along the way. And I think part of what we're seeing now is that slow journey, which is probably frustrating for all of us to build that trust. And it's trust in continuity, I think, of approaches from government. I think it's trust in each other to realise motivations of why people are engaging in the way they're engaging. I think there's probably trust in motivations for the research sector, that, you know, why are people interested in engaging with you as a potential industry collaborator? Is it just because it's going to help them get more nature papers, or is it because they're truly interested in you being successful as a business? And I guess the other one is trust too in I guess this is a bit tricky to explain, but trust in you as an employer as well. Is that I think at the moment, particularly in the research sector, we have the problem that we have too many people who are in insecure work and no real clear career pathways, and I think that loses the trust in people. Then there's also the issue relating to support when people take that brave and courageous step to spin out a company or leave the research sector to take their expertise into another field. There's no trust in saying, how can we let you have multiple different pathways, so that we've just done some work that with STEM career pathways, and what we're seeing is, since this is a nice tech group, it's a real diode here. Once you go from the university sector, you never go back again, or it's very difficult to go back. And that means that the university sector is missing out on the richness of people who've had experiences elsewhere and coming back in. All these things are that building up of trust. But I think the thing which underlies all trust, though, are deep values. Now that I think we've got in truckloads, so that's a good starting point. But trust takes time, and I think we just have to keep, you know, transparency, openness, sharing, collaboration, motivation for the right reasons. If we can bring that all out, hopefully we can nail that trust, and then you'll start seeing acceleration. But you can't have the acceleration before you get the trust.
The one thing you mentioned is values, and you and I have both been overseas recently, and it's very interesting to get a sense of what other parts of the world think about Australia. The quantum strategy was referenced a lot, as was our expertise built over a long period of time, as was the the values, but also when you're talking about regulatory environment or more certain work and minimum wage, etc. That is a very strong point for Australia. When you've been travelling over there, and obviously I'm talking about the US in this instance, what was your experience like looking back at the way people see Australia and the opportunity right now, given other parts of the world are moving very quickly, but not necessarily with that same sense of framework?
Well, we're seen, first of all, as doing excellent research, the place to come and build your skill sets and then suck them up and take them overseas. So it's really interesting, though, what they're beginning to see. And that was probably at the beginning of this role. I've been in the role, I can't believe it, nearly 3 years now. And at the beginning, that was really front of mind. What I'm seeing now, though, is a bit of a change in that Australia's relatively stable liberal democracy and our values are beginning to be recognised as a real opportunity for people wanting to come in and invest, because they think there's a level of safety there. Plus also, particularly on, it's not universal, but different parts of the world are interested, especially as we see the embracing of the Scope 3 parts of the Paris Agreement, which is looking at where do our materials come from, where do the services come from, and are they actually ones which are not just low energy but ethical as well. So that's becoming part of how you do business, and Australia's value system is something I never really thought about before, but it actually lights up. I know we're not perfect, but the idea of having fairness, having a good social system, having a good health system, having excellent education, recognising, even though we don't necessarily achieve it, recognising where our weaknesses are is something which is seen in high regard. And so as a consequence, what I saw when I was overseas was, particularly in the US, was seeing Australia as a place where people, because part of my job is saying, come to Australia and set up your quantum company in Australia. And a number of them say, oh, I hadn't thought of that. But now you've asked, we'll look at it. And when you go through all those things, they say, you're the place we want to be. And we've had one example was a company called Inflection, which was called Cold Quanta to begin with. And I said the same thing. I actually contacted them when they had this is going to sound terrible because you've had 2 panels today, which were all men, but they had an international panel thing, and I ran them and said, you just can't do that anymore. You've got to have women. And I'm sorry, I'm not mean, but you've got to do better. But the thing was, and I said, CSIRO actually has a rule that you're not meant to engage with something unless there's mixed panels. And so I said, I'm not really able to do that. Anyway, they said, oh, that's great, we'll get you on the panel. Second thing was also we'll do something about women in quantum because there's very low numbers. And then I started talking about their company, what are your plans and everything. And I said, oh, you should come and set up in Australia. And then they used the Breakthrough Victoria Fund to set up a subsidiary in Australia. And that's how you attract people in by sort of starting from that values base. So, I mean, that's just a little example.
I'm going to ask if anyone has questions in the room. And while someone's thinking of questions, I wanted to ask about focus. So there's 2 things, because it's sort of a bit of a double-edged sword. One, you talk about full stack. SQC is a great example. Gilmore Space has the audacity to be a prime, which is people like, it's taken people a long time to wrap their head around that message. So one is actually being ambitious, and the other is making sure we focus, given the size of the population, and we've talked a lot about capital today. What are you seeing in terms of where people are really able to focus on what is customer need and getting science in the right direction? It's a tricky question. Are there any tips from who you've been talking to on your travels?
Yeah, so I had the great opportunity on behalf of the government to undertake a national conversation to consider the national science research priorities, asking everyone in Australia it felt like everyone in Australia, what are the science and research that we should be doubling down on to deliver the country we want to be. It was really interesting. The first thing I heard from that was that we need to do fewer, bigger things. The other was want to make sure we maintain our liberal democracy with fairness and our values. Then climate change came into it, which I thought was interesting. COVID was definitely in the back mirror, and I'd heard it mentioned 5 times. I probably talked to way over 600 people. But they talked about infectious diseases and health and well-being. But the thing was really interesting was saying that we need to double down on a couple of things. The first one is our recognition of our environment and making sure that we have an environment that is healthy and sustained, because everything comes from the land. And I think we've got a lot to learn from our First Nations people, because one of the successes of their culture, which I'm not going to pretend I'm any expert on, but you know how they always talk about the land and the connection with the land? That's, I think, their secret sauce, to be honest, to why they've been a successful, enduring culture when every other culture in the world's killed themselves. They've actually gone on for 65,000 years. So that link to the land is something which is really visceral, and something I think Australians are beginning to realise we have to be better at. But how do we do that when the tension is that our wealth comes from the land? How do we get our minerals, which we need if we're going to have a successful energy transition? How are we going to have the food if we're going to feed ourselves, and yet be able to have the environment we need to have our health and well-being? And so that was one. The other one was stop talking about all this sick stuff. We want to be well. How can we be happy and healthy individuals in Australia and then just fall off the perch so that we're not sick? So change the discussion or the narrative around not disease and sickness focus in health and medical research, but how can it be well-being and thriving populations. And then how can we also have industries that Australia's got a competitive, but also a comparative advantage, because that's what we've got to think about. What have we got here that no one else has got? And then really double down on those. So, we heard about from Marcella about the opportunities for solar energy. We've got a lot of space and a lot of sunlight, so that's really good comparative advantage. How can we turn that into a competitive advantage? So I think we've got really smart people in quantum, and that's an area where we've how do you describe it? Had amazing foresight 20 years ago to invest so that there's a good $1 billion worth of investment from a range of sources into Australia's quantum research, fundamental research, so that we've really got, we're 5th or 6th in the world in quantum capability. Well, how can we build on that and really fan that flame? And so I guess it's looking at the things where we are a small country, but you pick a couple of things and do them really, really well. We've got a couple of hidden things, and I think photonics is a really good example, and lasers. We've actually got some really strong capability there. Then we've also got to look at things where we've got opportunity, but we actually may not have the capability, and a really good example of that is mineral processing, but doing it in an energy sustainable and environmentally sustainable way. So we heard about plasmas, and even though my husband Tony is a plasma physicist, and I believe that plasmas solve everything, that they actually do. I mean, the idea of low non-thermodynamic plasma processing, is that something that would allow us a new way of processing materials? So instead of having to go through and use chemicals that can be quite destructive, or can we have a circular economy approach with chemicals, so we have closed loop methods? So if we're going to take on things where we want to add value, and there are some areas where we've got the raw materials, we actually have a lot of the know-how, but we haven't actually linked them all up, and then say that's an advantage for us, but we have to almost leapfrog so that we're not using techniques that other countries are using that are therefore under the Paris Scope 3 make them non-competitive. What can we do to then sort of slip in and take over? So that's the way we have to think about it.
That would be incredible, because everyone's got their eyes on our critical minerals. And it was actually someone from Southern Cross Ventures saying, it has to be unlocked, and it has to be unlocked sustainably. And if there are new technologies that can do that, it'll take a lot of money and focus, but it will be absolutely game-changing.
But for us to do that, every one of those things, if we want to break through, and I know a lot of innovation comes from industries, but it still goes back to the research sector. The public funded agencies and the universities have to have substantial capability and fundamental work to be able to support that. If you don't have that, you're not going to be successful. So when we talk about an ecosystem, everyone probably rolls their eyes and goes, nah. But in actual fact, it's true. You've got to have all the bits, because if you don't, you're going to have a gap, and then therefore it's not going to work. The system will not. That systems thinking and planning, and also I thought it was really interesting in the discussion today, the need for us to have the ability to work together in teams across businesses, not just business-to-business collaboration, not just industry and working with CSIRO or with ANSTO or with universities, but actually getting away from this need that we're all competing amongst ourselves, knowing that, to be honest, our market is a globe. Our market in Australia is too small, so we have to club together locally and deliver, but really come together for that global market. And when we do that, I think that's when we're going to start seeing some really big inroads.
Marina, you had a question?
Thanks, Corrie, and thanks very much, Cathy. I love the work that you both do. Thank you very much for your work. I had a few questions, then my phone decided to die. But one of those relates to this idea of multidisciplinaries and teams. My background is in tech transfer the last 7 years or so within the university sector, so I had the pleasure of working with Michelle and others on really groundbreaking research. But there's a lot of research that doesn't hit the headline, that just does simmer away. Yes, we might protect some intellectual property rights, but then it's almost like, is there a draw card from industry, or that that sort of feels like it's lacking sometimes, or I have a great idea but I don't know how to let people know about it. Your thoughts, please, on how to collaborate better between the university sector and industry, and back and forth. Because I'm not sure if the R&D tax concession and other things are quite hitting the mark. Any ideas what we could do?
Well, if I knew the answer to this, I'd probably be every university's favourite person. But it's...
But you are already.
So look, I think the first thing is, let's go back to torts. The first thing is, I was very serious about our Vegemite effect economy, is particularly in the research sector. We need to have the metrics in place in the university sector that really encourages individuals to work in a team, so that they're not just the single professor with their underlings under them, adoring them and getting their PhD and off they go. That is changing, and it's great to see. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think Sydney University's set up some really good institutes that go across faculties, and they're doing some of the most innovative projects I've seen. I reviewed the Nano Institute, which at that stage Ben Eagleton was running, and I saw these projects. I thought, wow, these are really, really exciting projects which were solving problems. So they're very much mission oriented. And that's a real shift. And I just heard that Sydney University is actually putting commercialisation and industry engagement as one of their major metrics, as announced yesterday. Haven't seen the detail, but that's sort of interesting. ANU has got something which is interesting, where they're setting up something looking at a mission-based approach for agriculture, where they're bringing the whole community in to say, how can we bring the things I was talking about with environment, remoteness, workforce, because one of the problems, as soon as you educate kids in the remote areas, they go back into the city because they don't feel like they've got the jobs there. So how do we actually create, innovative jobs that attract well-educated people? So they've got a really good program there, and that's the G8 universities have come together across universities. I think that the fact that University of New South Wales has allowed companies to set up, so I only mentioned Silicon Quantum Computer, but they've also got Dirac, which Andrew Dirac's setting up, and there's a number of other ones. So I think we're seeing a huge transition in the universities. And to be honest, I also recognise that we ask the universities to fly all the time, because we're asking to educate. We've got the international student attraction, which is a very big part of our economy. We're also asking them to win Nobel Prizes, spin out companies, educate our future, be out there and letting everybody know how it works. So, it's amazing anyone's still standing if they're still working at a university, because I think our expectations are probably a tad high, and maybe we need to support where the different, making sure that they do the bits they do well and support them. I think there's things coming on board like Australia's Economic Accelerator, which is a really good pathway. So what are the bits that support from government to be able to allow a good idea to be taken through so it can be investable? Because we heard about capital today. When I've spoken to a lot of people who are looking at investing, because I am the Deputy Chair of Industry, Innovation and Science Australia, and so we get to hear a lot about the venture capital stuff. And what we hear is that a lot of venture capital finds it hard to find things to invest in. So there's a little bit of a gap of getting that readiness level for investment. And I'm hoping that the Economic Accelerator, I expect we're seeing a bit with the stuff that CSIRO is doing as with their some of their programs. I forget what they're called, but the one where you have a little bit of money and you match it. What's that one? What? Kickstart, yeah, that one. And then on program, all those sorts of things are sort of really lifting up our... I think we're being a bit hard on ourselves, to be honest. If you go back pre-2016, we were pretty hopeless, to be honest, as a research sector. But since then, I think we've gone really well. And so we just have to be a little bit patient and know that there's a number of different things coming together, and what we have to do is stitch them up in a way so that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, you know where the front door is to get help. And I think we're on our way, so don't give up.
We've got one more question, then we're going to let you off the hook. Cathy, just sort of Natalie over there.
I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read all the capability papers.
I did actually on the weekend.
Right, so page 55 was mine. Yes, I saw that. Yeah. That's fine.
That's why I thought they were so good. I mean...
No, so we've put a lot of money into research, we have heaps of money in the venture capital, and they don't have the pipeline coming through, and we're all sitting there going, ooh, why not? And in my paper, it's like 20 years ago when we were measuring commercialisation research activities. We then measured it again 21 years later, and there's 15% less tech transfer professionals working in the area but the amount of research expenditure has doubled. So the tech transfer professionals are the people in the universities that are tasked with trying to help the researchers get it out the door to see industry and all the rest of it. Back to Marina's question there. So what I was proposing in the paper is that there needs to be some other funding that's coming in here, because when you think about universities and how they make money, they make it because they have students, which they get fees for, and they get grants. They don't get money to, well, they can put money into commercialisation, but it doesn't make money for them. What it does is it makes money for the country. So when you do the $1 makes $5 in the economy, so companies, the government, etc., all make the money, not the unis. And so should money be coming, say, from the National Reconstruction Fund or the Industry Growth Fund to put in as an investment into capability and capacity building for tech transfer to unplug that bottleneck, and also recognise that it's a training mechanism that they do for these tech transfer professionals, not only work in unis, but they also work in startup companies, you know, investors, etc. So just looking at it in a different way, instead of it's a cost, we don't invest in it, but someone in the country has to. Otherwise, we're going to be saying, well, we've been saying this for 20 years, that we're great at research, we don't commercialise, we've been doing lots of things, but we haven't done anything about that.
Well, first of all, my role is to advise government. So that's great advice. You should pass it on because it's interesting. There's a couple of things there I want to unpick. The first one is, I don't know that we've really recognised that commercialisation is different to being a research scientist or a researcher, and it's not necessarily a straightforward thing to move into that as a profession, and being recognised as a profession is something I think all of us across the research sector needs to I guess acknowledge, but also make sure it's supported and that people see that as a career and an opportunity, not something which is an add-on or a, sort of something which you have to do, and what a nuisance. I think that it's really interesting looking around the world at different, just the roles of different universities. So Stanford's got and a lot of US universities don't have tech transfer officers. What they do is they let their IP all go and then have a philanthropic return from businesses that have been really successful. So we've grown, you can't just flip into another culture and another university sector. And it's something which is, there's things being put in place to try and address these things. And I know if you look at the programs that the government's putting in place, they are for a particular purpose. I think what you have to be careful of is that you don't start to repurpose them for a different outcome and then everybody fails at what they're trying to achieve. I think, what is important is to really put the business case forward. And I just heard today, for example, that the Academy of Science had a meeting with the Treasurer today, and he's really keen to understand better on what is the return on investment for research. So it's clear that we're not making the case so it's front of mind, and that's not in every parliamentarian's back pocket as to why research is important, why it should be funded, and then what the process is to see it be translated. So I think what our job is at the moment is policymakers will make policies because they need to do it, but they need to have the information to be able to make those policies. And that's what, I guess, things like the capability papers is good, but we need to then not just hope that, as I say, osmosis happens and it magically enters into the brains of people who are too busy to read anything. What we need to do is then follow them up with the visits and the explanations and the look at it, they call them placemats, I think. Look at things where you don't have to read, it's just the information jumps out because it's got pretty pictures and arrows and stars and percentage points and stuff. They're the sorts of things we have to get to a point where we are communicating the information so that the policymakers can make the right policy. And I think going around and recommending tweaking with little bits and pieces often doesn't work because they've got their baby, they've thought about it. If you're bringing in something new, you probably need to be just careful that you don't suggest a one which the shutters will go up. So you just have to be mindful that making the case, make it easy, and making sure that it's, you've got to go back. It's not just one visit. It's got to go back, keeping on knocking on doors and raising this.
Okay, Warren. And then I'm going to let Cathy have some lunch. Warren. You've got your outside voice.
Okay. we've just got a DOE grant. One of the prerequisites is we have to start a US entity, which we have. Germany launched their fusion strategy, and we're offering us support, but only if we go towards Germany. We haven't even entertained China, even though they're doing some really, really good work, and we've got some guys over in the UK now. So the anchor here, other than us being from Australia, is, you know, Australia is the land of grants and R&D tax credits, which is useful in the early stage. Is there any thought in government about policies that would actually be a magnet into Australia rather than the other way around?
Well, yes, but I guess I've got to be really careful because my role is not to talk about policy. It's about the advice that creates policy. And I think that's one of the things that's really important when you talk about the things that you are talking about, is that you actually have to get the information to be able to advise government on what it is that is missing or where the opportunity is, but it has to be evidence-based, which makes my job really easy because I have no ideas. I just they ask a question, I have the evidence to make it go forward, and maybe I do have ideas, but of how they might come together. But it's not telling them what to do. So that's the first thing with answering that. Not because I'm trying to wiggle out of anything. It's just that the sort of thing you describe is recognised. That's the first thing. The second is Australia has to remember it is a small country. We're 0.3% of the world's population. Our economy is 13th or 14th in the world. So we can only do so much. And I think and that goes back to the prioritisation, saying there's going to be some things which will disappear overseas because we just cannot do the investment that's needed. Or the other one is that you find what is the comparable advantage. Why is it has to be done here and can't be done somewhere else? That's when you have a really sweet spot. And if you can find that, that's a real advantage. And then it allows you to make the case. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not my job to say what's right or wrong with government policy, but it's also, I think you've got to really think about what is it you're really sort of saying and making sure that it's a recognition of it's not just a sort of oh dear, I'm in a great situation, but I'm being pulled overseas and I'm not getting enough support here. It's actually thinking about how things fit in, knowing that we can't do everything. If we're going to if we are going to engage in an area which is something which is we just don't have the capacity and the volume, we're probably not going to be as successful as something that does have capacity and volume, and it's making choices. And so therefore, if you're going to be backing horses, I'm not saying picking winners, we want to back horses and hope that we support them to win, is what I'm getting a sense that some of the government policies are doing right now. So quantum, robotics and so on, batteries, critical minerals. And so that's sort of giving you an idea of where this government's thinking. And so you've either got to think about how do I fit into their plans so that I can line up behind it, or you have to face reality saying this isn't the place to do it. So it's pretty tough thinking, but I think we've got to get better at doing that, saying that, yeah, we like the beaches and the lifestyle and everything here, but sometimes there's things we just aren't in a position to do here because we aren't ever going to, unless you're able to do that thing which really attracts that scale and that critical mass, and that starts from the research sector all the way through.
Cathy Foley, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.